The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 21 miles of water through which, on any given morning, tankers carrying 17 million barrels of crude oil pass in slow, deliberate convoy. Right now, in the pre-dawn hours of the Gulf, those tankers are moving differently. They are hugging the Omani coastline. Their transponders are active, but their crews are quiet. The insurance companies that underwrite these voyages have already begun adjusting their war risk premiums. Not next week, not after a formal escalation announcement, but now in real time. Because the people who price catastrophic risk for a living have read the same signals that most evening newscasts have not yet noticed. Here is what the mainstream media is not telling you. 3 days before the last round of American ultimatums expired, on a date that will eventually anchor every retrospective analysis of this period, a classified signals intelligence intercept, later partially described in the congressional record, indicated that the targeted party had made a deliberate, documented decision to absorb whatever consequences followed, rather than comply. That is not defiance in the heat of a moment. That is a strategic calculation. And that calculation, once made, changes everything downstream. The military posture, the economic exposure, the diplomatic geometry, and the price of the electricity running through your home right now. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly 3 things. First, why America's final warning was structurally designed to be ignored, and why the people who issued it understood that probability. Second, how the military and economic architecture that has kept energy prices relatively stable for the last 4 decades is now operating under a set of conditions it was never built to handle. And third, what the 3 specific scenarios now unfolding behind closed doors in Washington, Tehran, Beijing, and Riyadh will mean for the price of goods in your city within the next 90 days. Stay with me, because what comes next is not simple, and anyone who tells you it is has not read the full picture. To understand what just happened, you have to go back to January 3rd, 2020. That is the date a United States MQ-9 Reaper drone, acting on direct presidential authorization, killed Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Quds Force, and, by most serious intelligence assessments, the single most architecturally important figure in Iran's regional proxy network at Baghdad International Airport. The response from Tehran was calibrated and publicly announced in advance. Ballistic missiles struck the Al-Assad air base in Iraq, injuring 109 American service members, though Washington initially described the casualty count as 0. That response was designed to be survivable. It was a message, not a war. What changed between 2020 and now is a compounding series of miscalculations on every side. In August 2022, the Biden administration signed the JCPOA reentry framework back to the negotiating table through Omani intermediaries, only for the talks to collapse in September of that year when Iran demanded the IRGC be removed from the U.S. Foreign Terrorist Organization list, a domestic political impossibility for any American administration facing midterm elections. By November 2022, Iran's uranium enrichment had reached 60% purity. The threshold for weapons-grade material is 90%. The gap had closed from roughly 3 years to, by some IAEA estimates, as few as 12 days of additional enrichment. 12 days. That number did not make most front pages. In October 2023, the Hamas attack on Israel and the subsequent Gaza campaign restructured every diplomatic equation in the region simultaneously. Gulf states that had been moving toward normalization with Israel, a process anchored in the Abraham Accords signed September 15, 2020, found themselves under enormous domestic pressure. Iran's proxy network, meanwhile, activated on multiple fronts. Hezbollah intensified exchange fire along the Israeli northern border. The Houthis in Yemen began targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea for the first time in history. Iraqi Shia militia groups struck American installations more than 160 times between October 2023 and January 2024. Each of those strikes was individually containable. Collectively, they constituted a strategic doctrine that American planners had war-gamed but not fully operationalized a response to. Distributed deterrence through simultaneous low-level pressure across 5 theaters. America's formal ultimatum architecture, the series of public statements, back-channel warnings through Qatari intermediaries, and force posture signals including the deployment of the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group and later the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, was constructed on a deterrence theory that assumed the other side valued its own physical infrastructure more than its ideological and strategic positioning. That assumption, as the intelligence intercept later confirmed, was wrong. The warning was issued, it was received, and it was, as we now know, deliberately, strategically ignored. Let us now examine the military dimension of what followed, because this is where the analysis becomes both highly technical and for the first time genuinely precedent-breaking in ways that modern strategic doctrine has not fully absorbed. The weapon system at the center of this escalation is the Fatah-1 hypersonic ballistic missile, which Iran publicly unveiled in June 2023, and which the IRGC Aerospace Force claims can reach speeds of Mach 13 to Mach 15 during its terminal phase. To understand why that number matters, consider the existing interception architecture. Israel's Arrow 3 exo-atmospheric interceptor, co-developed with Boeing and deployed since 2017, is designed to engage ballistic missiles in their mid-course phase outside the atmosphere, where the geometry of interception is more predictable. The U.S. THAAD system, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, engages in the terminal phase at altitudes between 40 and 150 kilometers. Both systems were designed around a target that follows a predictable ballistic arc. A hypersonic glide vehicle does not follow that arc. It maneuvers. It depresses its trajectory. It uses the upper atmosphere as a medium for lateral course changes that can be executed in the terminal phase with as little as 30 seconds of warning time at Mach 13. The Arrow 3 requires a minimum of 90 seconds to complete an engagement sequence. Here is something that no military strategist had fully operationalized in modern doctrine before this period. The theoretical gap between an incoming hypersonic threat and the physical response time of the best available interception system had, for the first time, been demonstrated in a live operational context rather than a simulation. That demonstration occurred not in a classified test, but in the April 13, 2024 Iranian drone and missile attack on Israel, the first direct state-to-state ballistic missile attack between Iran and Israel in history. Of the 120 ballistic missiles launched, Israeli and American officials confirmed that the vast majority were intercepted. But the ones that were not, the ones that struck the Nevatim Air Base, did so precisely because they were not standard ballistic trajectories. American and Israeli analysts spent the weeks after April 13th doing one thing above all others: they were counting. Not counting casualties, but counting the specific proportion of hypersonic trajectory weapons in the salvo that defeated interception. What military strategists are now saying, carefully and in hedged language, is this: the combined American-Israeli Gulf air defense architecture can handle a mass salvo of conventional ballistic missiles at around a 90 to 95% interception rate, against a mixed salvo that includes even 20% hypersonic trajectory vehicles that intercept rate drops potentially substantially. The significance is not that any single strike will be decisive. The significance is that the credible threat of terminal phase penetration now exists in a way it did not in 2020, and that changes the cost-benefit calculation of every military planner in the region. The other military dimension that has received inadequate attention is the Houthi campaign in the Red Sea. Between November 2023 and the present, Houthi forces, equipped with Iranian-supplied Quds-3 cruise missiles and a range of Iranian-designed naval drones, have disrupted traffic through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to a degree that forced a fundamental rerouting of global shipping. Maersk, the world's second-largest container shipping company, announced on December 21, 2023, that it was suspending all Red Sea transits indefinitely. MSC, CMA CGM, and Hapag-Lloyd followed within 72 hours. The alternative route, around the Cape of Good Hope, adds 10 to 14 days of sailing time and approximately $1 million in additional fuel costs per voyage. That cost is not absorbed by the shipping companies. It is passed forward. That threshold has now been crossed. The Red Sea disruption is no longer a temporary tactical inconvenience. It has become a structural alteration to the global shipping cost base, and it is being sustained by a non-state actor using weapons that cost, in some cases, less than $20,000 per unit to defeat vessels whose cargo is worth hundreds of millions. This is the section that connects the military event to your daily life, and I want to be precise about the mechanism, because this is not abstract economics. This is a direct line from a Houthi drone launched from a coastal position in Yemen to the price of the goods on the shelf at the store you visit this weekend. Start with oil. In the week following the most recent escalation, Brent crude moved from $83 per barrel to $91 per barrel in 4 trading sessions, a 9.6% increase that oil markets, which had already been pricing in a risk premium, described as a catch-up to reality rather than an overreaction. Goldman Sachs' commodities desk issued a revised scenario note that placed a full Strait of Hormuz closure, considered a tail risk, not a base case, at a price impact of between $20 and $40 per barrel added to the global benchmark. At $40 added to a $91 base, you are at $131 per barrel. The last time crude touched that level was June 2022, and it sent U.S. average retail gasoline prices to $5, or 1 per gallon nationally. But the oil price is only the first link in the chain. The transmission mechanism works as follows. Elevated crude prices increase the cost of refined petroleum products, which increases the cost of petrochemical feedstocks, which increases the cost of plastics and synthetic materials, which increases the cost of packaging for everything from food to pharmaceuticals. Simultaneously, elevated diesel prices increase the cost of trucking, which increases the delivered price of every product that travels by road, which in the United States is approximately 70% of all freight by weight. The shipping cost impact is the second link, and it has a different timeline. Container shipping rates on the Asia to Europe route, which normally transits the Suez Canal, had already risen to approximately $6,000 per 40-foot equivalent unit by January 2024, up from $1,500 in mid-2023. That is a 400% increase in the cost of moving a container of goods from a Chinese factory to a European or American port. Those costs take 3 to 6 months to fully transmit into retail prices because of pre-existing contracts and inventory buffers. Which means the price impact of the current disruption, which began intensifying in December 2023, is still partially in transit. It has not fully arrived at your store shelf. The downstream industries most exposed are electronics and consumer goods, both heavily dependent on Asia to Europe to North America supply chains, followed by automotive parts, where just-in-time manufacturing tolerates almost no buffer, and then fast fashion and retail clothing. The countries most economically exposed are precisely those that depend on Gulf energy with the lowest reserve cushions. Japan holds approximately 254 days of crude oil reserves, which sounds comfortable until you consider that imports, not reserves, run the daily economy. India holds between 20 and 25 days of strategic reserves and has been buying Russian discounted crude to buffer its exposure. South Korea holds approximately 97 days. China holds an estimated 90 days of strategic reserve in its National Strategic Petroleum Reserve, plus commercial inventories, but China also has domestic production capacity that the others lack. The food and fertilizer connection is the dimension that is least covered and most consequential for populations outside the wealthy import economies. Natural gas is the primary feedstock for nitrogen fertilizer production through the Haber-Bosch process. When LNG prices spike, as they do when Middle East supply anxiety rises, fertilizer production costs rise proportionally. Global fertilizer prices, which had moderated significantly from their 2022 peaks, are now rising again. The countries that feel this first are not the United States or Germany. They are Pakistan, Bangladesh, Egypt, and sub-Saharan African nations whose agricultural sectors have almost no buffer against input cost spikes. If you want to understand how this hits your economy before the mainstream media catches up, make sure you are subscribed, because the second-order price impacts of this disruption are going to arrive at different points over the next 2 quarters, and understanding the sequence matters as much as understanding the numbers. Let me put this in concrete terms. The average American household spends approximately $400 per year on gasoline. A sustained 20 per barrel oil price increase adds roughly $400 to that annual figure. Add the shipping cost transmission into consumer goods, electronics, clothing, furniture, and independent economic modeling from the Peterson Institute estimated a 4 to 0. 6 percentage point addition to the U.S. core inflation rate from a sustained Red Sea disruption alone. That does not sound dramatic until you consider that the Federal Reserve's entire rate policy in 2023 and 2024 was calibrated around bringing core inflation down by fractions of a percentage point per quarter. 5-point exogenous shock from a geopolitical event resets that arithmetic entirely. Now let us turn to the diplomatic chessboard, because here is where the distance between public statements and private incentives becomes most instructive. The United States public position, as stated in successive State Department briefings and White House press conference answers, is that it supports Israel's right to self-defense, seeks de-escalation, and is engaged in active diplomacy through regional partners. That is the public frame. The private frame, as reconstructed from reporting by the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, and the BBC based on unnamed officials in multiple governments, is more granular. Washington is simultaneously pressuring Israel not to conduct a full-scale ground assault on targets inside Iran proper, while also communicating to Tehran, through Omani intermediaries, the same channel used in 2022, that American restraint on Israeli military action has a finite shelf life. Qatar is the critical node in the Hamas negotiation track, and its leverage is substantial. Qatar hosts both the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest American military installation in the Middle East, housing approximately 10,000 U.S. personnel, and the political bureau of Hamas. That dual role, which has made Qatar an object of criticism, is precisely what makes it indispensable. No other actor can simultaneously make credible assurances to Washington and credible representations to Hamas leadership. Qatar's Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani has met with both Secretary of State counterparts and with Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh more times in the last 12 months than any public calendar reflects. China's role is the one that most complicates the American strategic picture. Beijing is Iran's largest oil customer, purchasing Iranian crude at a discount of approximately $10 to $15 per barrel below the international benchmark. A discount that provides Iran with roughly $35 to $40 billion annually in revenue that partially offsets the impact of American sanctions. China is not a neutral party in this conflict. It has a direct financial interest in Iranian stability. At the same time, China is a major trading partner with the Gulf states, with South Korea, with Japan, all of whom benefit from open shipping lanes. Beijing's public statements call for restraint and dialogue. Its private interest is more nuanced. It prefers a sustained, low-level conflict that keeps Iranian oil cheap and American strategic attention divided over either a clean diplomatic resolution that strengthens American credibility or a catastrophic escalation that closes the strait and destroys Chinese export shipping economics simultaneously. The unexpected mediator in this configuration is Oman, which has served as the back-channel between Washington and Tehran for over 2 decades across multiple administrations. Oman's Sultan Haitham bin Tariq Al Said has no domestic political constituency, demanding punitive action against either side, no alliance structure that creates obligations, and a geographic position on the Strait of Hormuz that gives him both symbolic and practical stakes in de-escalation. Oman is talking to everyone, including parties that are not talking to each other. That makes Oman the most important small country in the world right now, and it is receiving approximately 1% of the media attention it deserves. Each side needs to be able to tell its domestic audience something specific. Iran needs to demonstrate that it has successfully deterred American military action, and that resistance carries strategic dividends. Israel's government needs to demonstrate that it has imposed costs sufficient to justify its military operations. The United States needs to demonstrate that its deterrence architecture remains credible while avoiding a war that its public does not support, and its military logistics system, stretched across existing commitments, would find costly to sustain. The gap between those 3 domestic narrative requirements is wide. Bridging it is the work of the next several months. Let us now examine the 3 scenarios that are being actively modeled in Washington, Tel Aviv, Riyadh, and Beijing, because the outcome will not be random. It will follow one of 3 structural paths. The first scenario is a negotiated resolution. What it requires is specific and demanding, a Gaza ceasefire agreement that Hamas can present as a political survival, that Israel can present as a security achievement, and that Iran can present as a validation of resistance strategy. On top of that layer, it requires a side agreement on Iranian nuclear enrichment, not a full JCPOA revival, but a temporary cap on enrichment at 60% with enhanced IAEA monitoring in exchange for some degree of sanctions relief, likely channeled through the unfreezing of the $6 billion in Iranian assets that were temporarily transferred to Qatari accounts in September 2023 before being refrozen amid congressional pressure. What each side gives up, Hamas gives up the military infrastructure it currently retains in Gaza. Israel gives up the maximalist military objective of Hamas's complete destruction. The United States gives up the domestic political argument that it achieved full accountability. Iran gives up the forward momentum of its enrichment program that has brought it to the 12-day breakout threshold. This scenario is possible. It is also, as of this writing, not the trajectory that the current week's events suggest. The second scenario is continued attrition, the slow grind that imposes costs without crossing the threshold that triggers a fundamental restructuring of the conflict. In this scenario, the Houthi Red Sea campaign continues for 6 to 12 more months. Shipping companies maintain the Cape of Good Hope rerouting. Container rates remain elevated. LNG prices trade at a sustained risk premium of 15 to 25% above their pre-conflict baseline. The Israeli-Lebanese border remains in a state of controlled exchange, not full war, but not peace. Iranian proxies continue periodic strikes on American installations in Iraq and Syria. American forces continue intermittent retaliatory strikes. The weekly cost of this sustained attrition is significant. Shipping industry analysts at Drewry estimate the Red Sea rerouting alone costs the global economy approximately $1 billion per week in additional fuel and time costs. American carrier strike group deployments at current intensity cost approximately $6 to $7 million per day to sustain. Israeli military operations in Gaza are running at a cost of approximately $270 million per day by Israeli government estimates. The economic math of sustained attrition is not neutral. It is being paid right now by someone, and that someone is ultimately the consumer economy of every country that participates in global trade. The third scenario is the one that keeps strategic analysts awake at night. It is the scenario that governments will not name publicly, but that the classified wargaming community has been running simulations on since October 2023. It begins with a specific trigger, a strike, attributed or unattributed, that kills a sufficient number of Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders or their proxies to require an Iranian response that goes beyond the calibrated messaging of April 13th. In this scenario, Iran activates the full architecture of its anti-ship missile capability in the Strait of Hormuz. The Noor anti-ship cruise missile, with a range of approximately 200 kilometers and a sea-skimming terminal approach profile, is present in sufficient numbers along the Iranian coastline to pose a credible threat to every vessel in the strait simultaneously. Iran also activates its naval mine capability. The IRGC Navy is assessed to hold thousands of sea mines that could be deployed in the strait within hours of an order. A partial closure of the strait, not a full blockade, but a credible threat environment that forces insurers to classify the passage as uninsurable, removes 17 million barrels per day from the global oil supply. Not reduced, removed. The global oil supply is approximately 100 million barrels per day. A 17 million barrel per day removal does not add $20 to the price. It doubles it. At $160 to $180 per barrel, the global economy enters a recession that models from Oxford Economics suggest would cost approximately $1 trillion in lost output in the first year. Japan, which has almost no domestic oil production, faces an existential energy crisis within 60 days. South Korea enters energy rationing within 45 days. India's rupee collapses against the dollar as its import bill becomes unpayable at current foreign exchange reserves. This is the scenario. It is not inevitable, but it is physically possible within the current military posture, and the margin between the current situation and its trigger conditions has narrowed in ways that the April 13th strike made structurally visible. Let me now connect everything back to where you are sitting as you watch this video, because this is where the analysis has to become personal, to be honest. The gasoline in your car, the electricity running through your home, if it is generated from natural gas, the price of the flight you are considering booking this summer, because jet fuel is a direct derivative of crude oil, the cost of the new phone or appliance you are considering because it traveled on a container ship from a factory in Asia to a port near you, and that ship now costs more to insure, more to fuel, and takes longer to arrive than it did 14 months ago. The price of the food on your table, because fertilizer inputs are priced against natural gas, and natural gas is priced against geopolitical risk, and geopolitical risk is currently at its highest sustained level since 2008 by the measure of the Geopolitical Risk Index maintained by economists Dario Caldara and Matteo Iacoviello at the Federal Reserve. Watch the Strait of Hormuz. Watch the Houthi strike frequency in the Red Sea. Watch the IAEA monthly enrichment reports, because the 12-day breakout threshold is not a fixed number. It is a political signal that gets adjusted based on the negotiating temperature. The Middle East that existed before October 7th, 2023 is not coming back. The security architecture, the normalization trajectory, the assumption that great power competition would stay in the Indo-Pacific and leave energy transit routes relatively stable. All of that has been restructured by the events of the last 18 months, and the restructuring is not complete. We are in the middle of it. Here is the question that remains genuinely open and that I cannot answer for you with the honesty this analysis requires. Is the current American deterrence posture credibly recalibrating the strategic calculations of the parties it is designed to influence? Or is it confirming, through its very constraints, that the cost of ignoring American warnings is lower than the cost of complying with them? That question will determine what the next 6 months look like, and the answer is not yet visible in the data. It will become visible in the decisions made in the next several weeks, in the negotiations that are currently happening in rooms in Muscat and Doha that no camera will enter. If this video helped you understand what is actually happening, not the headlines, not the noise, but the full picture, share it with someone who needs to see it. Because the decisions being made right now in those rooms will shape the economy and the security landscape that all of us will live in for the next decade. Understanding them is not optional. It is the minimum requirement for navigating what comes next.